Welcome to Really Jewish. Welcome.
Thank you, Oliver.
We are really Jewish. Or are we really Jewish? We're delighted to welcome you to our conversation about being Jewish in 2026. This is a brand new podcast. This podcast is for people from all walks of life: Jewish, non Jewish, religious, secular, believers in God or not. Really, anyone who is curious about Judaism and Jewish life, and maybe you too are really Jewish or not, are invited to join this conversation. I'm really excited to welcome Yair Eldan, who is a law professor in Israel. I'm Oliver Joseph, a rabbi in the UK. I'm religious. Yair is secular. Those are broad categories. We are old friends having this conversation pretty intensely about being Jewish, Israel, and community without too much interruption over the last 15 years. And we're bringing this conversation to you, the listener, about Judaism, about Jewish life, about flux and transformation. There's lots of conversations going on around synagogues, dinner tables in Israel, in the UK, Europe. And we want to take this conversation to a podcast and talk about what it is to be really Jewish. Welcome to our podcast, Really Jewish, with Yair Eldan and Oliver Joseph. Let's get stuck in, Yair.
Thank you, Oliver. Do you think I will miss an opportunity to talk about what it means to be really Jewish? For a person who thinks that there is nothing that, makes you really Jewish, it's a good start for me. Just to say that I'm very happy to be here because I myself am, I'm dealing with my Jewish identity as a permanent thing that, follows my path here in Israel. And after October 7th, of course, I had to think about my Jewish identity because my perception was that being Jewish in Israel enables you to be whatever you want because you have the layers of the Jewish state, which, gives you a lot of space to explore your Judaism and your Jewish identity. And if before October 7th I would have this, feeling that sometimes I'm even closer to Arab Israelis in my lifestyle, in my thoughts, in my views, even more than to Haredi Jews, after October 7th, where I saw that anti-Semitism is still a real thing. Just because I'm Jewish, there are people who are, disgusted by me, criticizing me. And I'm happy to be here and to speak to you about these things because, you are like a counterpart living in the UK in a different context. Thank you for inviting me, Oliver.
Lovely to be together. Listen, I'm fascinated in the way these two stories come together. I think the experience in Israel and the UK are both intimately intertwined and also entirely separate. Exactly the same moment. De-interconnected. The Jewish community in the UK, Europe and Israel, and living in entirely separate universes, which is an interesting even starting place. But let's get first into Yair. Tell us a little bit about your own journey and your story, and tell the listeners a little bit about you.
Well, I teach law at a college in Israel, most interested in jurisprudence and Jewish law. As a secular Jew, I was raised in a Zionist religious family, so I have this very warm and very deep connection to the Jewish texts. And we met as part of my very, deep interest in Jewish texts. And I teach also religion and conflict management with the idea that religion can lead to violence and fundamentalism, but at the same time, it could be the base to peace and to self-knowledge and to compassion and all the good traits of a human being. So I'm trying to actually give my secular students a feeling and a path into the Jewish texts, Jewish religious texts, in order for them to understand that they need to, or need is a big word, but they could benefit from knowing these texts. What else? I'm a father and a husband and live in Jerusalem proudly. What about you, Oliver? Let's hear a little bit about you. I think everybody wants to hear how you got to this place, to this podcast.
The first place to start is I'm a rabbi. I guess that's pretty central to my identity. I did roughly 6 years working as a rabbi in community, and then I think coming up on 5 years now, I became freelance. And I didn't really know what that was at the time, but I've basically done a lot of different things in my journey as a rabbi, and currently work in a place called Canary Wharf, which is a chaplaincy for a large commercial estate in the centre of London. And we serve about 200,000 plus people on any given day, but we're a small chaplaincy team. And then I also work for the European Masorti Bet Din, running most of the operations across Europe for that Bet Din, primarily dealing with conversion. The part that I'm interested in relation to this podcast is when I started out as a rabbi, and you've been involved in this journey because we studied together at the Hartman Institute, and you were an inspiring figure then, as you are now. As one of my teachers, we learnt Talmud together. You were a teacher of Talmud there. It's been a really long journey. So I did 7 years of study, 5 of which were in Jerusalem, 2 of which were in Los Angeles, and then I've been a rabbi now just past 10 years. And the thing that I've really come to, particularly in the last year, is that in matbeah, there isn't in Hebrew you say matbeah, a structure for how to be a rabbi. I think maybe in the ancient world, maybe in the olden times, that rabbis were rabbis because their uncle or parents were, and there was some kind of structure. But really, because I'm the first in my family to be religious in the way that I define it, and certainly the first I know of a rabbi in my family, I really had to kind of create my own structure for what that was and what that meant. In that realm, one of those parts is how to present your voice. And I think when I was in Jerusalem, I was surrounded by loads of phenomenal academics and scholars and rabbis. And even in Europe, in this context, I'm surrounded by some pretty impressive people. And there's the aspect of imposter syndrome and intimidation. And it's taken me time to develop my own voice and to say, I've got something to say. I'm really passionate about what it is to be Jewish and Jewish community and all of the different webs of connection that we have between one another as Jewish community, both in the UK and with Israel and worldwide. And it's important to have this conversation, apart from anything else that we have, so that we continue to develop strength as a community to endure.
Listen, for me, it's also important with the context of our own relationship. I really felt in the last 2 years that I'm disconnecting in a way from social interactions because of the massacre of October 7th, because of what I saw before in all what the Israeli government is trying to do to democracy here. I really got into myself, and a lot of my social connections were loosened. And in a way, your hand that you are putting forward, for me, it's very important. In this point of my life, I also had a friend that committed suicide 2 years ago, which made a very deep impression on me. And I really appreciate this conversation about things that are really important to both of us. But it's also a way of, deepening our relationship, because our relationship in the last 15 years was, close, very intimate in a way, but very distant in a way because of the distance between Europe and Israel, because each one of us took a path. You took a path and you did a lot of things over the years. I wrote, I deepened my artistic path in life. and in a way took a distance from my academic, career, and it's just an opportunity for me that I'm very glad about it. I'm very happy about it.
It's a perfect frame. I'm very sad for your friend who took their life. What could sharpen one's appreciation and relationship with life more than such an event? In my imagination, listen, I think you described very sweetly our friendship. I don't think either of us are in the business of describing that we're the best of friends and we've been friends since we were 3 years old. It's not true. We have a teacher-student relationship originally, but the bit that I'm fascinated with and the bit that I love is the sweetness of our relationship. Our relationship revolves around a beer on like a busy street in the times that I've been in Israel over the last now 10 years. And particularly like around October 7th and COVID, those were extremely limited in duration or in numbers of visits, especially during that time. So in part, some of our relationship has been pared back. But there's a consistency and a continuity of the way that we've managed to maintain our friendship. And I've always loved the conversations that we've got into and really taken a lot from them. And we've exchanged photos and voice notes over lots of years now about how our families are going and how life is going. And I was, as part of this stage, 10 years a rabbi, part of this stage of my own professional development, I've been thinking about podcasts for a long time. And a couple of people had mentioned like having chemistry with a host and finding somebody who's going to, you're going to pop with, it's going to be exciting. And this feels like a good starting place in terms of a conversation.
But why did you want to call the podcast Really Jewish? You wanted to make me mad, right? You wanted to upset me. Why did you do that?
Listen, you're thinking about something which is going to capture people. I think we could spend the whole of the first season of talking about what's really Jewish. I think I have questions about my own Jewish identity on a daily basis about what is really Jewish. I have questions on a daily basis about what the future of the Jewish people looks like. I have so many questions about what Judaism is and how to best live Jewish life. I have questions about, I didn't frame before, I'm also a dad and a husband to 3 small children. I have lots of questions about how you raise children in a Jewish way. So the question of really Jewish that this podcast is, feigning or attempting to identify is ultimately a question that you can sit with for the entirety of a lifetime.
You know that after October 7th, in the months that followed and the way that the IDF actually dealt with, trying to fight the Hamas, which were hiding in buildings and underneath the surface. Everybody talks about revenge as something that, the way the IDF actually bombed Gaza after October 7th. And I didn't have a problem with this in the months that followed October 7th. But afterwards, I felt that the way that we dealt with is horrific, and I have a lot of guilt about it. But I wouldn't say that it's not a Jewish way to deal with such a thing, because Judaism and Jewish text, as you know, has a lot of texts, and people actually were citing these texts, Jewish texts, in order to justify the IDF's approach in Gaza that made a lot of innocent people die. And so that's my problem with really Jewish. Everything could be Jewish. Judaism is really a civilization. I think what I'm looking for is the way that my moral views actually comes one with my Jewish identity. I think that's my path in life, and that's what I want to actually deal with in our conversation.
Listen, it's interesting. I think the perspective I come from is the question of Israel is very hot here in a UK context. And, you know, I in our lineup for the kind of first 8 episodes, I put Israel like deep into the weeds on the fifth or the sixth or the seventh episode, because I know, I know it is a topic that will evoke response and especially in a rabbinic space, is something that people talk about with great peril and with great thought and reservation, that you should enter into the topic of talking about the state of Israel in community or community life. That being said, is part of the fact that I could put Israel on episode 7 or 8 in our podcast exactly expresses the differential between what it is to live in the UK and Israel. I think, for me, like front and center is ultimately anti-Semitism. Not that it's something that I experience every single day, but the very fact that there is a sense, an overwhelming sense in the community. Now, I do this work day in, day out. I speak to, in my regular day, let's say Monday to Friday, which is our working week, I speak to at least 10 or 12 people on an average week, one-on-one, intimately, half an hour, 40 minutes, sometimes longer. And almost with everyone, and this is in a European context, not just in a UK context, there are struggles with protests in the streets, in the center of European capitals, struggles with identity in workplace, about, do you share the fact that you went to a wedding in Israel recently? Do you share your Jewish identity bichlal in any sense or form? These are real personal struggles which are happening now, today. And that's also why I want to present Really Jewish, because Really Jewish for me is about presenting Judaism with pride, with honor, with dignity. I'm not saying that I think the war in Gaza has been horrific and a very difficult period for the Jewish community in so many different ways worldwide, in Israel and here. But the bit that I'm dealing with on like my patch, as you say in English, in my space, is like a deep, like a societal delegitimization of Israel. And I think by virtue of like the depth of delegitimization of Israel, an undermining in fundamental ways of Jewish life. And that is a catastrophe. So it's definitely really Jewish because I want to piss you off, Yair. Definitely. Like I want something which is, you say in Hebrew, like harif, like spicy.
Sure.
That's going to like get us going. So, but it also speaks to the of, I don't know, maybe crisis is the wrong word, but it speaks to the depth of the struggle that we have right now.
Right, and see how poetic it is that you are dealing with thoughts about presenting Judaism in a very proud way, in light of anti-Semitism and legitimation of Israel. But and me, and I'm living in Israel, there is something about what I said before, that I'm free in a way, free to think about my Jewish identity, free to explore it in a very open way, even now when times are so critical, even now when the existence of the state of Israel is being questioned. I feel my situation is in a way more laid back, A.B. Joshua said always that you can be fully Jewish only in the state of Israel, and he really pissed off everybody in England and in the United States. I'm not sure he was right. I mean, he was referring to the fact that you can actually form a Jewish attitude in foreign relations. That's something very unique for the state of Israel. You can form a Jewish economic social approach, only in the Jewish state. But what I'm saying is even more, more basic. I have the space to think about my Jewish identity, about the guilt I feel today after 2 years of war, which comes from my Jewish identity, yeah? And I have the time and space to explore what it means to be Jewish for me, because I have this layers of identity, the calendar, the Hebrew language, everything enables me to be very relaxed. Even now when I feel threatened, I feel that I'm less reactive than you.
Just say one more word on what that means, less reactive than you. It sounds very judgmental, Yair.
How Israeli of me. Oh my God. Reactive in a way that you talked about presenting Jewish identity with pride in light of what goes on in Europe these days. That's in a way that reaction to what goes on the outside, and not something that goes from the inside or derives from the inside.
Listen, but Tu B'Shvat, we had the festival of Tu B'Shvat, and Tu B'Shvat is the seder of the Tu B'Shvat is all framed around the shells, like the way that we're protected from the outside and the way that we're vulnerable to the outside, and different layering of vulnerability and exposure. That's an interesting connection to spring that we're now kind of moving through in the Jewish identity. Listen, I live both. I think I live a very rich Jewish life. I think in a UK context, we have Jewish infrastructure, we have Jewish community, we have really rich and good Jewish life, and I feel like I'm living it. We have a school that's a small Jewish school that we center our lives around. We have at least 2 communities, synagogues around us that we are involved in as a community. I teach in at least 2 or 3 different communities as a rabbi. That's an exciting space, but there's definitely a sense around us that the world is changing before our very eyes. And the very sense of living Judaism in an open and a proud way, even that aspect of Jewish pride, I think, is controversial in the European context. What have you got to be proud of? Look at the war that you've just executed and perpetuated on the Middle East. What's there to be proud of? And my version is, and I passionately want to present this to the world outside, is sure, there are terrible things that happen across the world and across society. I don't think Israel is living in a unique space of terror and of war and of moral crisis, if that's what we want to examine. But the aspect of Judaism is much, much deeper. Is much, much deeper than that part. And I'm also, I'm inspired by in this time, and one of the courses that I'm teaching at the moment at the Paya Day Institute in Stockholm is about Chassidut. And what's the inyan of Chassidut? What's the essence of at least the Chassidism that I read? It's exactly about that. It's the rabbis, the Me'orinai and the Ish Kodesh, the 2 rabbis that I primarily read at the moment, are specifically interested in the root center, the Shorashim, the Ikarim, the roots and the center of Judaism as a concept, with blocking out the outside noise of what's going on in Ukraine, Russia, what's going on in Second World War Germany as 2 examples, blocking out the external interference to find what the Jewish core is. And I'm interested in that project. Yes, we have lots of rabbis who spend their whole career talking about politics, and they're people who I hugely respect. But part of the inyan, but part of a religious project, part of a Jewish project, is about the inside.
I understand it. It's very important for me to hear that. Interesting. It actually surprised me. I hope I'm not sounding again judgmental, but just a small example from my life. My daughter she goes to secular kindergarten, totally secular. But because it's Israel and it's a Jewish state, they talk with the kids about Purim, about the Esther Megillah, Megillat Esther, and they talk about what happened with the king Achashverosh and about Haman and about the whole session, the whole story of the Megillah. And she comes home, and she comes home obviously with things she heard in Gan, in kindergarten. And then the conversation begins, Oliver. Interesting, because she comes with, the story, the basic story, told from a certain narrative. It could be a very, violent narrative, or from the victimhood narrative saying, listen, the Jews were very threatened by the fact that people were allowed to kill them, according to the story, and they reacted, they acted, and it's wonderful and actually justifies the state of Israel, and so. But when she comes home, I start to talk to her about things about my Jewish identity, which connected to the gender issues of the Megillah, about Esther and Vashti, and the fact that they were objectified by all the men around them. They were objectified, and the fact that for me there is something that is contradictive to my Jewish identity with regard to the fact that there is something very in the sense of happy. There is something which is joyful about the fact that Jews were killing other people who wanted to kill them, but there is something joyful about it in the story of the Megillah, which I want to talk to, and I talk to with my kids. And it happens naturally. It happens with no effort. That's what I try to say to you. And it enables me, in a way, to be very open and to be very relaxed, and not to think about the consequences of what it means to say things when my kid has to actually go to the street and deal with anti-Semitism, which is a totally different, way of life, in a way of a totally different consciousness, if you want them to survive. I hope you understand me.
Yeah. I mean, the bit that I struggle with the most is the aspect of conspiracy theory, which and also collective punishment of the Jewish community, because I was very active on social media about a year ago, and I had quite a long break, and now with this podcast I'll be back up again, and the number of comments, people writing kind of baby killer on the website or on different social media channels, or just free Palestine, like I think it's a misunderstanding of Judaism and Jewish life. I think it's also an ahistoric reading of Judaism and Jewish life. I'm ultimately totally opposed to war. I wish we didn't have to go to war. I ultimately believe that Judaism is an ethical religion. I think probably the state of Israel is being run by a bunch of crazy people at the moment, and that has affected how this war was pursued. I also believe that Judaism as a minority faith in the UK and Europe should be protected. That the project, which is European democracy, is better when our minority groups are protected. And the number of kind of conspiratorial kind of memes and chats and this that are going around about how the Jews control the world, and the Jews control the media, and the Jews are running the police force, and the Jews are running the politicians, and is scary. And it's all anecdotal, because I'm not a politician, and I'm not in the business, I'm not an anthropologist, I'm not in the business of doing heavy research in these matters. Most of my statistical data comes from conversations with people who report back on their own personal experience in their place of work or in their profession. And compared to October 7th, which was the dreamy, blissful years of certainly UK Jewry, the data is overwhelming in terms of people's experience. Anybody who has even one half of a foot inside Jewish community is really struggling at the moment. And I think we're going to carry on with this conversation because this is something that we're going to come back to. I'm going to pivot us to this conversation about friendship, and with that we'll finish up today. We have lots of plans for this podcast, and I'm really excited of us being together. But part of this conversation that we have together each week will revolve around some kind of Jewish text, some kind of core piece that we're going to explore together. And this week, our first introductory week, Finding Our Feet, it will just be for a couple of minutes. We looked at this text from Tanait about Havruta. And what we have together, and I learnt this text also, I think, in a Hartman context where we first met, the Hartman Institute that I was a student at and that you worked at. It speaks to this aspect of Barzel Yachad, that somehow steel on steel or iron on iron sharpens. And I know that between us, an aspect of our friendship, and the aspect of why we're here today, like why Yair, why Oliver do we want to do a podcast, is about this sharpening, that somehow through the aspect of relationship between the two of us, we sharpen and develop our own ideas and our own notion of, in this context, what it is to be really Jewish. And I'm interested when we look at this text and when we think about the idea of Havruta, like, how do you understand this concept? Just to clarify again, Havruta is two people sitting together in a room, traditionally in the Beit Midrash, in the house of study, now on Riverside on this app that we're using to record the podcast, studying Gemara, studying Halakha, studying Jewish texts in order to arrive at a significant and strong vantage point on that text. What's your take on that?
Listen, I mean, it's very rare when you think about it to be surprised in the conversation these days. People are so intertwined with their own opinions or own society that, holds the same opinions, that to be surprised is very rare. And it happened to me today when you spoke about the Yesh Kodesh and about shutting down the voices, which are shutting down the voices in the middle of the Second World War and thinking about your Jewish identity from within. For me, it was surprising to hear, and it's wonderful when it happens. It could happen only in a real conversation. Havruta for me is a real conversation. It's John Stuart Mill, right? Being open in a conversation and sharpening, as you said, from the Tanakh text, sharpening your ideas with the other ideas and questioning yourself. And when you said judgmental about me, true, it comes from a different, aspect of Havruta, because could mean also, what I said now. Havruta could mean our relationship, most of it, which means you come to a conversation, you're open, you actually learn something because you're open to other opinions. But Havruta could also be in the context of more competitive and more, there are, in rabbinic texts, there are metaphors for the relationships between Havruta, metaphors from the context of war, metaphors, as you said now, of iron, which is sharpened by another iron, which is also a little bit violent, or by fire, which all goes to the more judgmental, competitive aspect of, studying together. Hopefully, our conversation would be more the learning part, the more compassionate part of studying together, because I really believe that study or learning cannot be in the context of a competitive context. Really learning, internalizing some, patterns of thinking could happen only when you're relaxed. You're not trying to prove something. You're not trying to compete with someone. That's my initial take about what's going on.
I think in another few months' time, we're going to have to come back to this topic because we haven't lent it enough. I'm not opposed to the violence of friendship. I think I like just to kind of to present the other side. I think some of my most fundamental relationships involve chad in Hebrew is related to the word which means one, and there's like a kind of the chad is literally a sharpening, like you would sharpen a knife. And there's something, like I name drop my friend Alon, who's a new friend who has really pushed me forward in this podcast story. I can certainly mention my partner Natalie, my wife, who is a sharpener. She's somebody who pushes forward and it expects the same of me. Many of my most significant relationships, I think, including you, I'm not saying that they're violent relationships, but they are relationships of push as much as pull, and of fire as much as love and softness. And I think both framings are important. There's a midrash that I was learning yesterday about the importance of love and fear in relationship with God. Why love and fear in relationship with God? The Rambam says is because we need them both. We need in this context, we need the fire, and we need also the love and the softness and the adoration at the same time. I relate to this topic because I think the journey that we're on, both in our friendship and beyond the comfortable walls of this friendship that we are reinvesting in and redeveloping, I think the world outside is tough. And so there's need in friendship for a lot of love and a lot of understanding and consideration. And there's also need in friendship for pulling us up. We live in a time, I believe, where we have to be our best selves if we're going to sustain and endure. It's a time of greater competition and of greater strife. And that demands of us to be better.
I'm so happy you ended that, because I was afraid that you will start being violent with me with your first things. But in a way, I'm happy and proud to be in this conversation, because there is something so rabbinic about you, which is authentic rabbinic role in society, which I think the role of rabbis for me is bringing hope to people, which is so difficult these days. And in the way you closed your things about friendship and about the importance of compassion with the context of what was going, in the world, it already gave me a little bit of hope. So I'm very happy and proud to be here, Oliver. Thank you.
I'm happy and proud to be here too. Listen, I think part of this, the other part of friendship that we didn't mention, is about vulnerability. And that's a nice kind of full circle on why we're here doing this podcast. I think there's an aspect of this podcast I would like to present, which is about spiritual vulnerability, about sharing a little bit of our story each week, not just for the sake of sharing the story, but for the sake of really learning. And in many ways, what we're doing here as Havruta, in the context of our friendship, in the context of this podcast, is going on that journey together. But because it's 2026, we're doing it in a very public way.
I totally identify. Aristotle talked about friendship, three forms of friendship. Utility friendship, which is you're using someone in order to achieve something. Pleasure friendship. You're, going with someone to the movies. You're going to shows with something. You like to do things with that person. But he's talk about true friendship, which is a journey in the search of truth, your self-truth, the truth, the objective truth, if there is something like that. And I'm so happy that we are starting a journey of this kind together. That's what my feeling.
So with that, we're going to wrap up for today. Yair, thank you for being with us. Thank you for agreeing to be the host of Really Jewish. In the next couple of weeks, we've got some exciting episodes coming up. We're going to dip a little bit more into my life story with Yair's life story, and present as we go. Listen, we want your feedback as the listener. If you're listening on YouTube or if you're listening on any of the platforms that you hear your podcast on, we are open to your feedback, and we are building this podcast from the wheels up. We're already on the road. If you want us to help us produce, edit, or join our team to support this podcast, please be in contact. Send this podcast, especially as it's the first day, to friends and family. Offer us a 5-star review where you listen to the podcast. And if you want to be in contact, email me. I'm easy to find. hello@oliverspikejoseph.com. And finally, as we go, listen to a couple of episodes first, but you're welcome to support the making of this podcast by way of our Patreon account. All of these links are going to be in the show notes. It's really exciting to start off this journey with Really Jewish, with Yair Eldan and Oliver Joseph. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks, Yair.
Thank you, Oliver.